Very good afternoon to all the people who are following us from different parts of the world. I am Daniel Camargo, and together with Maestro Alberto Portuguese, we have embarked on the project of generating some kind of reflection on peace. Today, we are brought together by something very interesting that Alberto has been contemplating over these days, which is related to Donald Trump's second term, and in some manner his foreign policy. In that regard, Alberto will be providing us today with some guidelines to enable us to think from the perspective of peace about the role of this character on a global scale. Good afternoon, Alberto. How are you?
Good afternoon, Daniel. I'm doing well here. Feeling a bit chilly because today we have 3 degrees in London. But I'm comfortable inside the house. That's all right.
I'm very glad, Alberto, that you're well, and I'm very glad to have you here. Alberto, I wanted to ask you several questions. To start with, something very simple. I wanted to ask you how you perceive the influence of Donald Trump's second term on global efforts for peace and demilitarization.
Well, I am of the opinion that Donald Trump is in pursuit of, just like I am, the peace of the world. Naturally, he holds the position of President of the United States of America. But he has the responsibility to ensure that the military industry does not suffer as a result. Because if he acts contrary to that, they will kill him without hesitation or mercy, as it is a matter of life and death. Just as they assassinated Kennedy when he was actively pursuing peaceful resolutions. In 1963, during a time when the entire military-industrial complex was resolute in its determination to engage in warfare with Russia at any cost. And Donald Trump finds himself in a similar predicament. But he makes an effort, he tries, to make a difference and change things. He had already performed quite admirably during his initial term when he orchestrated for Israel to establish peace with nations that had been adversaries for numerous years, specifically the Arab nations of the Arab Emirates, and diplomatic, commercial relations were successfully established, with consulates from both countries being set up in each other's territories. That's why he also extended an invitation to Putin, first to have a discussion about this particular topic, because Putin is similar in this regard. Putin already, in the year 2017-18, was expressing that the United Nations needed to put an end to this policy of war and not compel Russia into engaging in a war with Ukraine, because Ukraine initiated the attacks. In 2014, right after they concluded their internal revolution, the Civil War, they commenced hostilities against Russia. Well, what he desires is to bring about a transformation in that system. It is important to keep in mind that Donald Trump is a businessman, but he is a businessman who focuses on the happiness and well-being of humanity as a whole. What he does is what he has been doing throughout his entire life, which is to construct buildings, construct houses, construct casinos, construct golf courses, construct magnificent hotels, and all of those things. People dare. But of course, these are expensive items and only. Individuals with a certain level of purchasing power are able to enjoy such luxuries. What he would really like is for there to be Trump hotels, and all over the world, and for everything to be more affordable, and for everyone to be able to enjoy the wonderful things that he offers. His ultimate dream is to see those hotels thrive and become a symbol of luxury and comfort. What he least desires is to destroy, because his entire life is dedicated to building. He has always been a builder, and that truly defines his life. On top of that, he has a large family, and as a family man too, he always thinks they lack nothing, and that they have the education, that they have everything they need to succeed in life. And this desire for well-being and success extends to the entire world. In reality, that is truly what he wants for everyone. But naturally, all the powers that be are aligned against him. Every single one of those powers that sustain themselves by feeding off enmities, by thriving on tension and conflicts. They absolutely love that because they have not only experienced it personally, but they are constantly living it in the cinema and on television all the time. It appears that this is the kind of life that one is expected to lead, and he desires to alter that system. But it is extremely challenging to do so. I comprehend it in this manner. For instance, the incident that occurred the other day involving Zelensky when they encountered each other in Washington, and during that particular televised conversation, which attracted so many dreadful criticisms aimed at the unfortunate Trump. I never perceived that as something that was wrong on the part of Trump. For me, Trump at that moment was speaking in the manner of a father addressing his child, a child who is perpetually engaged in conflicts and persistently creating dreadful situations, and who enjoys maintaining that behavior. And what he desires is for that terrible slaughter, that devastating destruction of Ukraine to come to an end. However, Zelensky wishes to continue with that. It is only natural that Trump, who is not fond of wars, would be opposed to such actions. In that regard, I can only offer my support. Zelensky came to Washington, traveled to Washington with the expectation that he was going to receive more weapons from the US, that he was going to negotiate that, as if all the weapons that are received from so many other countries were not already enough. What he desires is to persist, because, in truth, he bears the responsibility, as he was the one who advocated for the war. Because it is not merely a Russian invasion or an attack, as it is often simplistically described in a war that was mutually agreed upon, and that commenced in February 2022. This was because that particular month, Russia held the presidency of the United Nations Security Council, and thus possessed the authority to determine the precise timing for its initiation. And thus everything was meticulously prepared, and he was fully aware of all those details. Diplomats from all the countries are together every single day at the United Nations. They dine in the same restaurant, sit at the same tables, and discuss everything. Therefore, it is no surprise what happened. Well, That's how the whole thing started. Since then, this acceptance of the war by Zelensky is akin to accepting that a dog, or that a dog decides it will engage in a war against a lion, is equivalent to how it will be for Ukraine with a small army. A war against a country that possesses such a vast military. It was nonsensical from the outset. So, that war has already resulted in nearly 1 million people being killed or injured, and it has led to 8 million people being exiled, consisting of Ukrainian individuals who were forced to leave their homes because they did not want to face the risk of death. And in addition to the destruction of the country, which naturally the construction companies will be delighted with the amount of work they are going to have. But this is not the topic we are discussing. How is it possible for an individual who has already caused such an immense amount of damage, both in terms of the economy and human suffering, to their own country, to still think, continue, and persist in fighting? It is utterly insane. This man should have never, under any circumstances, left the theater. He was a comedian who made people laugh. And he was very successful. Why did he get involved in politics? Or was he pushed into politics only to ultimately contribute to the destruction of his own country? Therefore, that is my personal opinion on the matter.
I have a certain subsequent question that I would very much like to present to you. And do you believe that the policies of Donald Trump could potentially contribute to increase or decrease the level of international tensions?
I mentioned this before I responded to your initial question. He would like to do it, but there is a significant amount of resistance. The international military industry is merely waiting for the moment when tensions escalate to such an extent that we find ourselves embroiled in a third world war. This is precisely what the industry desires. For instance, just today, they handed over to Morocco, located in Africa, approximately 20 Apache helicopters, which are known as Apache helicopters. And they cannot be referred to as defense vehicles because they are specifically named and were purchased with the primary purpose of conducting attacks. All the warplanes and warships, their tanks, everything is designed and intended to attack and ultimately destroy. So, as long as that industry continues to exist, and people desire it, support it, and give it their approval, it becomes exceedingly challenging for Trump to transform the country into that enormous golf course he envisions in his dreams. Because it is extremely, extremely challenging, as long as people, the general public, and those who cast their votes, continue to accept the military industry and the armed forces. It becomes exceedingly difficult to bring about change. It was necessary to eliminate that initially, in order for politicians to be compelled to merely address and resolve their disagreements through meaningful dialogue, through mutual concessions, through comprehensive conversations, negotiations, but not by resorting to force.
I have a question, Alberto, in that regard. It has been observed that Donald Trump has a very particular immigration policy concerning migrants, particularly Latinos, within the American Tower, as he also has a very particular policy in the matter of commercial linkage. Of course,
Because if I were. Yes, I shall continue. Look, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense at all, this existence of constantly creating hellish situations in other countries just so that people feel compelled to flee. Now, for instance, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, Ukraine has produced 8 million refugees, and we are responsible for creating hellish conditions in all the countries of Latin America, particularly in Central America, forcing people to flee in order to avoid death. Sometimes to escape death by weapons, but at other times to escape death by starvation, and to secure a place to live. And all of that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Here in England, there isn't a Trump, yet the situation remains exactly the same as it is elsewhere. The authorities are in a state of desperation due to the billions of pounds they are compelled to allocate each year for the refugees who arrive seeking asylum, who leave their countries behind, and they continue to come all the time. Ukraine, naturally, many have arrived, but from Africa, from African countries, many millions. And we must spend time. Carefully analyzing each individual, we must spend time. Diligently finding them employment, securing them housing, and teaching them to communicate in the language of the country. It costs an absolute fortune. What sense does this make? If we didn't have a military industry, which we are compelled to sell in order to pay the employees, then all those people would be living happily in their own homes, in their own countries, who until now in other countries have no desire to leave. But we are the ones forcing them to leave because of this cursed military industry. We must put an end to this insanity.
in that regard, one of the matters that appears to be connected to the new process currently unfolding in Ukraine is associated with the potential for a specific territory to now transition to Russian sovereignty. Could we possibly interpret this, Alberto, as a dynamic that would enable peace to prevail in the region?
Yes. However, peace too. As long as a military industry persists, peace cannot be everlasting. Peace, whenever politicians are involved, must always be maintained, or compelled to be constantly seeking wars, creating wars, and negotiating wars. It is their obligation. Because it is only the politicians who have the right to possess armed forces. Even the mercenary armies are under the ownership of governments. Everything is under the control of governments by the politicians. Governments are the sole entities that possess the exclusive right to make purchases from the military industry. A private individual is not able to purchase a tank, purchase a warplane, or purchase an Apache helicopter. That is something that only the government can buy. And solely the government possesses the authority to issue commands to the armies, instructing them to go forth and engage in acts of killing and dying. This is their duty and responsibility. I believe I have mentioned this on previous occasions, and it was articulated with great clarity by Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. when he was questioned about the reasons behind his acceptance of the transaction involving the sale of Canadian military aircraft to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And he was fully aware that they were going to utilize them for the purpose of killing individuals in Yemen. And I am the Prime Minister of Canada, and my foremost duty and obligation is to serve and protect the interests, welfare, and well-being of the Canadian people. My choice was between Canadians who would lose their jobs, similar to the thousands of Canadians employed in the military industry, or Yemenis who would end up dead. That was not even the exam, and naturally, I, as the Prime Minister of Canada, made the decision to proceed with the sale of the airplanes. That is the reality of the situation, and that is precisely what occurs consistently. When I was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in the year 2008, there was a website that was launched where people could post messages, and they would generally post messages wishing me good luck, and the website was called Good Luck. There were approximately 300 messages that arrived from Israel, and a significant number of them were from individuals who were employed in the Israeli military industry. And everyone was saying the same thing. Alberto, you're right. We must put an end to this, because we are aware. We are fully aware of the number of deaths we are causing around the world, because they knew that the instruments they were manufacturing were being exported to Africa, exported to Colombia, exported to Ecuador, to Peru, and they were fully aware of the deaths they were causing. They themselves felt bad about it, but it was the only job they had available, and that's how it happens all over the world. Here in England, the poorest areas are the ones with the highest concentration of military industries, ensuring that people cannot go to work elsewhere. In Africa, it is exactly the same. And in India, poverty is promoted in an extraordinary manner to ensure a large number of people join the army, as it is the only means for them to have food to eat. India has approximately 1 million plus an additional 1.5 million or so individuals serving in the armed forces, with half of these individuals being volunteers who do not receive a salary. They enlist primarily to secure meals in the morning, at midday, and in the evening, and a significant number of them do so to have shelter over their heads, and nothing else. Nothing, absolutely nothing, nothing of that kind. The world would not be in this state if we did not have this disgraceful military enterprise. You, being Colombian, must be aware of it. How many governments, how many elections have been conducted since the Civil War started? And all those who stand for election, they all make promises, claiming that with them, the violence will come to an end. But it never truly ends, because they are the politicians who permit the entry of all the weapons.
Alberto, in that regard, we still have time for one final question. So, I wanted to ask you, what valuable lessons we could potentially learn and apply from the role of Donald Trump in relation to the significance of diplomacy and international dialogue, particularly in how it shapes global interactions and fosters mutual understanding. That would be an initial form of diplomacy.
Diplomacy. He is not diplomatic, just as I am not diplomatic. He is not diplomatic either. But he naturally tries. He has people who are experts in the field of diplomacy around him, so he receives some advice. I do not have that kind of advice. And it is not a matter of employing any kind of special strategy whatsoever. It's similar to the military industry. It's akin to a cancer on the planet. And if a surgeon is determined to save the life of an individual and is aware that by excising the cancer, they will indeed be saving that person's life, they proceed to remove it in its entirety without leaving any part behind. I take out a small piece today, another small piece next year, and yet another small piece the year after, not because of that. But they are attacked. And well, it is essentially the same. We require nothing more than an effective and competent police force to ensure the safety and peace of mind within our society, as there will always be individuals prone to violence, which is precisely why we have established prisons and the judicial court system, where individuals who engage in acts such as murder or causing harm, or any other illegal activities, are sent to prison. Therefore, having a police force is essential in our society. There are individuals who might lose control over themselves and act violently towards another human being. Hence, it is a natural occurrence. But this whole situation of having slaves of the governments, because that is exactly what they are, slaves. They are forced to learn how to kill, to engage in fights, to destroy the planet, not just destroy life, but also to demolish homes, tear apart families, obliterate, devastate the environment, because as they contaminate the air, the land, and the sea with military products, it is something truly out of the ordinary. So, we need to put an end to that, and that is precisely what we are up against. Well, what I advocate for, and I believe that everyone should join me in doing so. Because telling someone, for instance, presenting a child with a piano, yet prohibiting them from playing it is illogical. If we provide the piano, it's the same with weapons. Because we don't hand out a revolver to each child in school just in case. Simply because someone might attack them, so they have something to defend themselves with. No, if we don't want them to use a weapon, we don't give it to them. So it is entirely illogical to keep insisting that countries should have an army but not use it. It is incredibly absurd. So incredibly absurd. It's akin to presenting a Muslim with a bottle of whiskey as a birthday gift and suggesting that it's merely for decorative purposes in his home, but he should refrain from consuming it due to his Muslim faith. It's exactly the same. In reality, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I sincerely hope that what I'm articulating is clear.
Yes, Alberto, without a doubt it is clear. I find it very interesting because the figure of Donald Trump has gone through various stages, from being a person outside the world of politics, then becoming a very important person in the Republican Party, to becoming President of the USA, then having a global influence, to now being one of the most important people in decision making in global foreign policy. Alberto, we have reached the half-hour mark of our program.
You understand that it's not that he wants to have Trump. It's not that he wants to have influence because he desires it, but simply because he enjoys having influence. What he truly wants is for the world to live in peace. And as long as we don't understand that, we understand nothing at all. We need to understand that. And it doesn't matter if he's a Republican, Political colors have nothing to do with it. It's all the same. Political colors are all the same. I know so many people, politicians who have switched from a right-wing party to a left-wing party or vice versa. Each individual acts according to their own desires from that perspective, which is essentially a theoretical concept. The political, in the time of communism, for instance, was officially considered to be entirely left-wing. There were so many billionaires, so many of them, that everything was revealed precisely when communism came to an end. And there they lived as if they were interconnected billionaire networks. I myself, having traveled extensively as a musician, have had the experience of staying in the homes of musicians who were not communists, in countries that were under communist rule, of musicians who were not communists and who consequently faced significant difficulties because they did not possess the same financial resources that the musicians who were communists had access to. That is to say, those individuals who were recipients, those who possessed the backing of the government and who were granted permission to travel internationally, had a passport, and then in their residences, within their own country, they had beverages from every corner of the globe. These were items that the general populace could not purchase on the street. Ordinary people could not simply walk into a shop and buy a Scotch whiskey. But if one happened to be working for the party, and if you had whiskey in your house, everything was absolutely dreadful. Well, fortunately, that situation has come to an end. But we continue. We continue with the injustices in the world. Injustices that come from the system in which we live. If governments did not engage in such absurd, dirty, and corrupt military spending, then there would be no poverty, nor would there be any other issues. Because no economy is capable of absorbing that kind of expenditure. USA. At that particular moment in time, it possesses nearly $36 trillion in outstanding debt. And that never stops increasing. Each year it's more. It will never be any less. Never can that expenditure ever be covered. It is absolutely impossible. And that causes the cost of living to rise globally, affecting the entire world. Therefore, there are simply no other options available. Either we save humanity and the planet, we take care of humanity and take care of the planet, or we are completely and utterly ruined beyond repair. So, there are absolutely no varieties available, and there is simply no alternative option whatsoever. Alberto. He concluded by stating that if I desire to eat apples, I plant an apple tree, not a banana tree, because my intention is to eat an apple. It's analogous. A Sikh piece. I don't need to instruct my children on how to engage in combat and provide them with weapons in order for them to live peacefully. It's completely nonsensical.
Alberto, very interesting your reflection regarding Donald Trump, bearing in mind how complicated the character is.
And I would like to conclude. He's not complicated, Daniel. He's very straightforward. He's a very straightforward man, very clear. No, the thing is that you are against him. Therefore he is looking for things. But it's not like that.
I am not saying it as a supporter, but rather as a critic. However, I also consider that from a state perspective, I believe there is no neutral character involved in the exercise of politics. In that regard, there is also a very specific criticism within me, naturally, of the party systems, and naturally of a figure, such as the one Donald Trump also represents. But I wanted to ask you the final question in reference to what you believe might be the current connection between Europe and Donald Trump.
Well, Donald Trump desires to be friends with everyone around the globe. However, the world does not wish to be friends with him as long as he maintains this stance. All of Europe, who are situated right here in England, Salma has already stated that we are going to deploy a significant number of military forces in order to be adequately prepared for any potential conflict or confrontation with Russia. At the same time, he says, it is intended to ensure that there is peace, and it is completely absurd to be killing people and then calling that peace. Sending soldiers to kill others and be killed themselves, and then having the audacity to call that peace. It's absurd, and that's what needs to be understood. That this is not a solution, but NATO, which is essentially the supermarket for weapons for the entire world, desires and promotes the occurrence of war. It's completely absurd, utterly nonsensical. It's an insane world, entirely due to this toxic poison that is known as militarism.
Very well, Alberto. I am extremely grateful for our program today. I recommend, suggest, and warmly invite the entire audience to please comment in the YouTube box, to write to me on Instagram, to write through the various means. We have questions for Alberto, reflections, contributions, all with the idea of building a world in peace. We will be with Alberto reflecting. Tomorrow we will resume. Alberto, once again, thank you very much. Greetings from Buenos Aires. And to the entire community that is watching us, I wish you all a peaceful season. And Alberto, thanks a lot. Daniel.